Well, I just want to say to you, it is great to be here again. That's right. It is great to be here with you. It is great to be in this space and place that we call Roughing It. And because this is the space and place that we call Roughing It, listen, you know how we do it. We don't come alone. Why is it that we don't come alone? Because we understand the power of what happens when you and I are together. What happens when you and I come into a space and place where, listen, our relationships are going to be empowered. Relationships are going to be what God has called it to be, what you and I have decided for it to be. Because we understand in this place that, listen, our relationships can blossom, they can flourish, listen, they can be maximized, but it is because you and I are going to do what it takes to make it work. And so listen, while we are here, you know, the one thing that we always say, if you're here with us on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Listen, make sure that not only do you subscribe to our channel, but listen, make sure that you hit that bell icon so you can get those notifications when we go live. And if you're with us here on Facebook, we're saying let's make sure that we do the same. Let's make sure that we like the page. Let's make sure that we're following Life Empowerment Church. Listen, and as we always say, it does us no good if we're here by ourselves. You know why? Because if we are going to grow together, then we're going to have to learn together. And that's why we always say like, share, and follow. And so listen, we are here today for Roughing It. Listen, we're here today to make our relationships not just work, not just get by, not just kind of, just to kind of be able to say, well, at least we've, somewhat made it across the finish line. No, listen, we're here for thriving, flourishing, maximizing relationships. And because we're here for just that, listen, we know that, listen, we don't want to do this alone. We want to do this together. We want to do this with those that are most important in our lives. And as you know here, listen, we say that this is not just about romantic relationships. This is not just about professional relationships. Listen, this is about all relationships. That's right. Listen, friends, co-workers, neighbors, family members. It doesn't matter what kind of relationship that you and I are in. The reality is that you and I are going to be in a relationship with someone outside of ourselves. And it's important that we come to this space and place ready to have our relationships inspected, to have them fueled, to have them to flourish. And so listen, here was a particular quote that I came across that I thought was worth sharing with you today. And so here, when you read this quote by Garth Brooks, he says, the greatest conflicts are not between two people, but between one person and himself. Now, listen, I want you to see that, and I want you to really read that and see it for what it's worth. Notice now, it says that the greatest conflicts are not between two people, but between one person and himself. Now, listen, when you see that, it may not spark anything of insight to you, but let me tell you why that becomes so important. That becomes so important because I tell you, how often is it that once you and I have been in some kind of conflict. Now, listen, conflict does not always mean an argument, does not mean a fight, does not mean that people are yelling and screaming. I'm talking about conflict. Now, we've already defined that, but just to make it clear, listen, we've said that conflict has to do with simply disagreement. And so how many times is it that you and I have been in a conflict only after the heat has maybe settled, Our emotions have cooled off. The smoke has cleared. And all of a sudden, in hindsight, we find that this conflict was more about us than it was about the issue, than it was about the person or persons in which we had this conflict. It was really more about, what did this reveal about me? What did this reveal about you? And when you and I can have that kind of awareness, conflict becomes good. Conflict becomes important. Conflict becomes something that, listen, you and I want to make sure that you and I are experiencing, not because we're just simply trying to just get into the midst of something simply because we're just trying to have conflict. I'm talking about conflict that is purposeful, conflict that really serves you and I, conflict that is worthwhile, because at the end of the day, when you and I can learn about ourselves, remember, when we learn together, we grow together. And sometimes it is simply me having a revelation, having some insight, having some information about me that helps us, because I became a little better. That's right, because I became a little better. And so listen, I just want to thank you for being here with us today. I am pastor and therapist Marcus Ruffin, and I meet with you here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And this is a live broadcast. So listen, that means that if you're watching this in the live moment, you can submit your questions on YouTube or Facebook. And listen, now you have to submit your questions pertaining to what we're discussing. And I tell you, I will answer your question right here on the air, right here in this very moment. And I thank you for the opportunity to be able to help maximize your relationship. And so let us go ahead and move forward. Now, you always know that if you've been here, if you are a guest, let me explain. I believe that all relationships have to do with three components: spirit, soul, and body. And so if we only address one dynamic, I only help you 1/3 of the way. And so when we talk about all three dynamics, I help you in the fullest way. And so I always like to have a passage. Sometimes I choose a passage that we will cover for the entire segment of what we're talking about. Here in this segment, we're talking about resolving conflict in relationships. And so in the next segment that we'll talk about, I probably have another scripture that will relate to what it is that we're discussing. But I think here, when you look here at this particular passage, I think that all of us can identify with it. It says, if a fellow believer hurts you, go and tell him. Work it out between the two of you. If he listens, you've made a friend. So this tells me that, at some point, you and I are going to be hurt in a good relationship, in a healthy relationship, with somebody that has my best interests at heart, somebody that is really for me and not against me. That there's going to be some point in our humanness, in our maturing process, that they're going to do something, not intentionally, but they're going to do something that is rub me the wrong way. They're going to say something that is not going to agree with my feelings. And so the goal is not just to cut people off. You know, in the time of this recording, there is this thing such as cancel culture. And I think that we're seeing it sometimes in healthy ways, but I think we're also seeing it in unhealthy ways. And some of what we're seeing is that it's like as soon as you do something wrong, they write you off. Hey, no longer to be heard from. And sometimes we get into that same dynamic when it comes to relationships, that we feel like, hey, you've crossed the line, you've done something wrong, you've hurt my feelings, and therefore, hey, it's all over. And I think here when we understand that the passage is saying that you acknowledge the hurt. We're not acting like, when they stepped on our toes that it didn't hurt. But we're saying is that with that, we're going to, in a healthy way, approach the person and be able to deal with the pain that was created. So notice as we even go on to the next one, it says, if he won't listen, obviously he can also be she. If he or she won't listen, take one or two others along so that the presence of witnesses will keep things honest and try again. I think that is really so monumental that he's talking about just because it didn't work the first time. Just because you didn't get the answer, we didn't resolve it, we didn't work out all the kinks to the problem. He's saying, listen, you don't give up simply because it didn't work. And I would tell you that when you're in a significant relationship, a relationship that is meaningful, one that holds value and high esteem, that there are going to be times in which I promise you, you may have to keep going at this issue, not because anybody is trying to continue with the pain and the hurt. It's just the reality that some things requires time, consideration, and sometimes you've got layers to the problem, and you've got to really deal with each layer to the problem so that you can ultimately get to a place where there is longevity of peace and tranquility and a solution that works for the both of you. That's right. Listen, sometimes it requires just that. Because we're here talking about how do we resolve conflict in our relationships? How do we resolve conflict in our relationships? And one of the things that we have established early on is that there's a difference between conflict resolution and conflict management. Conflict resolution says that, listen, we're going to find the solution to this problem. Conflict management says that there is a process that we have to navigate in order to get to the solution. And sometimes we don't really come with the skills, the knowledge, the information, the know-how to be able to navigate through the process when you consider our feelings, when you consider our thoughts, when you consider our beliefs, our values, all of these dynamics that are intertwined into the process. If I don't really understand how all these mechanics are working, what's going to probably end up happening is that I'm going to quit prematurely. I'm going to feel like it's not worth it, or I'm going to keep doing the wrong thing with good intentions. Good intentions with bad execution still does not end at the right destination. And so therefore, we have been talking about the difference between the conflict management and conflict resolution. And so we started here last week talking about these conflict management guidelines. And so today I want to pick up where we left off because we talked about 3 of them last week. Now, if you've missed any of this particular teaching on resolving conflict in relationships, you can go back to our Facebook page or to our YouTube channel, and you can see those particular teachings there, and you can go back and listen to them, because I think that once again, when we learn together, we grow together. And sometimes when you only have a side of the information and the other person doesn't have that same information, sometimes it creates an imbalance of how we are actually navigating to the solution, to the resolution, how we're managing along the way. And so therefore, sometimes you even not only have to go back and listen to it because you missed it, but sometimes you actually have to go back and listen to it because there were some things you missed when you were listening to it, because you can only take in so much as you're listening. And so sometimes that is just the case. And that's why I'm glad that it's recorded so that you can have access to that same information. All right. So with that being said, let us look here at number 4, talking about what are the guidelines when we're looking at conflict management with the goal of getting to a resolution, right? And so guideline number 4, it says, don't mind, read, or assume. Just ask instead. It says, notice now, don't mind read or assume. It says just ask instead. Now, here's the thing about mind reading. And I think personality-wise, some people are more prone to this than others. There may be other reasons that kind of feed into this, but sometimes you get what I call the street corner psychics. You get these infallible superhero type people that believe that they have these telepathic abilities. And so therefore, sometimes in them talking about their sixth sense, they fall into the trap of mind reading. And I'm telling you that it is one of the things that will set anybody up for failure when you and I are trying to mind read. Now, the technical term for this, there's actually a psychological term, and it's called empathetic accuracy. And so here's the thing. It was developed by a psychologist by the name of William Ikes. And so he's out of the University of Texas there at Arlington. And so he's done a lot of research in this regard. He has a lot of proven studies about this whole thing regarding mind reading. And what I'm telling you is that one of the things that he has found in his research is that on the average, there's about a 20% accuracy in people trying to interpret somebody else's behavior. You know, they're looking at their tone of voice, they're looking at their body language, they're looking at all of these sort of things, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what are they saying? What are they really saying? You know, trying to read between the lines. And what he has found is that if it's just a complete stranger and you're trying to, quote, mind read, right? What he has found is that with that, there's about a 20% accuracy. But he says even with close friends and even marital couples, that when there has been research, that the most that they have seen on the normalcy is about a 35%. So that means 3 times out of 10 that you may be right. It's not even saying that you will be right. It's saying that you may be right. And so 3 times out of 10, you're right. He says he's never seen anybody, score really high, like even above 60. And so the reality is that mind reading really doesn't work for the most part. And so this is why I say, instead of trying to read somebody else's mind, trying to read their intentions, it's just better to just ask. Just ask. Just, here's what I'm sensing. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what it appears to be. And being able to point and put it out there in that way. Now, granted, it is based upon the reality that someone's going to be honest in answering that question. But even if you are trying to mind read, that's no more of an accuracy and honesty that you're trying to acquire, even with the assessing of their behavior that you are going after. And so therefore, this is what I'm saying to you, that mind reading or assuming, well, this is what I assume. Well, instead of assuming, just ask. And so here's the thing about mind reading that I think that is even a little more important. It is being able to recognize that here, that when you talk about mind reading, it is being able to ask yourself, what is it that I don't know yet? Because I think the attempt is really trying to get to the heart of the matter, is trying to get to the information. You're trying to really understand the truthfulness. And here's what I'm saying to you. You may have to reverse that and ask yourself, what is it that I really don't know about this yet? Because here's the thing. What you don't know is what is in the other person's mind. What is it that they're really thinking? What is it that they are really considering? Sometimes it's being able to understand their story. And so sometimes because of what is happening in the midst, it really has something to do with the story that they are really being able to interpret in the midst of what is happening right now. And so therefore, this is why you and I have to really take the opportunity to ask instead of mind read. Now, even in the midst of bad behavior, there's usually some kind of positive intention in their actions. Although it may be unskillfully expressed, there is still something that they're trying to do, something that they're trying to acquire, something that they're trying to communicate, even when it is bad behavior. And this is why you and I have to be able to go back and ask ourselves the question is, what is it that I don't know about this? Because if I'm curious, instead of being maybe offended or maybe being put off or maybe being slighted because of how this is not going according to my plan, I may be able to really understand what's driving their behavior, what's driving how they're talking, what's driving how they're acting. And therefore, listen, most people respond to conflicts based upon their perception about what is happening, not necessarily based upon the objective or the facts. It's their perception. And so if I feel threatened by your inquiry, I feel threatened by what it is that you're saying, I feel threatened by your approach, then I'm going to automatically default to being defensive because I feel like I've got to prepare and guard against an attack. And so therefore, if you are trying to mind read that, see, they're just trying to not be honest. They're just trying to hide the truth. They're just trying to do this or that. And the reality is they don't feel safe. The reality is that they feel like you've turned to the enemy instead of a trusted friend, a confidant. And so now they've gone into protective mode. But then when we really allow enough conversation to go by, we really get to a place that where now we can find out, well, why were you saying that? Why were you acting like that? Why did you respond in that manner? And when they feel safe, they'll be honest and they'll tell you, well, here's what I was really thinking. Here's what I really thought was happening. And so therefore, it can eliminate sometimes unnecessary conflict. It can eliminate unnecessary fuel to a conversation because now we have more insight instead of trying to assume and then operating off of that assumption. And let me just say this, a conflict is often more than just a disagreement. It is often where somebody is misreading, misdiagnosing, misunderstanding what is happening in the moment, and they are reacting to that misinformation. They're reacting to that misunderstanding, and therefore, we begin to go down a trail that's not even pertaining to the very issue at hand. This is why when you and I are looking at how do we have guidelines, one of the things, listen, we don't do is mind read because therefore it leads to assuming, and therefore assuming often will get us into a misunderstanding, a misdirection, and before you know it, we have more going on than what is necessary. And this is why it's just always better to just ask. It's always better to just ask. Now, here's sometimes what happens. The reality is that sometimes we don't even recognize that we are assuming. We don't even recognize that we're mind reading. And so we're acting off of our own assumptions, off of our own sort of assessment of the situation. And therefore, sometimes we are adding to the conflict because we are injecting things into the conversation that doesn't exist, it doesn't apply, and we have created a scenario that did not actually exist because we don't recognize sometimes our own mind reading and sometimes our own assuming. Now, once again, listen, if you have questions about what it is that we're discussing, you can put those on the YouTube or you can put those on our Facebook page. Now, listen, here's the next one that I want to bring up to you. Now, here's the next one. Now, the next one here is that when it comes to, remember, guidelines for conflict management, it is this one, knowing the difference between facts versus opinions. Now, let me tell you that this is a real heavy one. Knowing the difference between facts versus opinions. Now, let me just say this from the get-go. If you're having a conflict, remember, conflict is a disagreement. If you're having a conflict and it is all about opinions, it is all about not facts, but just opinions, just my perceptions, my views, my feelings about this, the only way that you can resolve those is a compromise. Let me just say that from the get-go. That's the only way you're going to bring peace and tranquility to that kind of conflict. But as much as that is simple and clear, let me tell you what happens and why when you and I are in a conflict and we get our emotions fueled. And listen, here's the thing about emotions. When you talk about your brain, your hypothalamus, which is right here, kind of right behind the frontal lobe of your brain. And what happens when you get fueled in your emotions? Your hypothalamus becomes dominant, and your frontal lobe, which is known for your logical reasoning, takes a backseat. And so what happens, now you're all in your emotions and you're not being rational. You can't even be rational because your hypothalamus, your emotions are leading the way. And so let me tell you what happens here and why facts versus opinions become one of those things that we have to stay on top of. It's a guideline for managing conflict. And here's the reason. Is because when you and I talk about opinions versus facts, the reality is that at some point, our feelings or our opinions begin to feel like facts. Let me say that again. At some point, our feelings, our opinions begins to feel like facts. And when our feelings or opinions have turned into facts in our mind, this can be challenging for anybody that's in a conversation. Because now we begin to defend our opinion as if it is a fact. And listen, and this is sometimes how we will inject this whole opinion into a factual way into a conversation. For example, we would say something like, stating our viewpoint, we would support it with, well, I think everyone would agree that. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not true, but because I've already put that out there, it's almost like, well, you can't disagree because I just said that. Most of the time, everybody would agree to this, right? Or at other times, we might state our opinion and follow it up with, that being the case, right? I just gave my opinion, and then I say, that being the case, right? We now begin to build a whole argument around this particular perspective. And as much as we want to hear the other person's perspective when there is a conflict, we do not want the perspective to turn into a fact. We do not want to now allow this opinion to possibly become dangerous because we assign this factual status to it. And so therefore, if I disagree with your opinion, I have disagreed. I disagree with you. And because I disagree with you, now the problem is no longer the problem. You're the problem. And one of the things we talked about is that we've got to be able to separate the problem from the person. And so the moment that the opinion becomes the person, that becomes difficult to separate. And so therefore, this is why if you want to win the argument, go ahead and state your opinion as a fact. But if you want to resolve the conflict, you have to consider your position and recognize that it is simply an opinion that you hold about the issue that you all are discussing. And you have to remember that it is just that, your opinion is your perspective. It is not fact. Matter of fact, let me bring up this chart for you. I think that this really helps to lay out how facts differ from opinions. How facts differ from opinion. Now, if you would look on the screen with me, you will see that here on the left-hand side, I had the basis for the comparison. So you go down and you see the meaning, you say based on, you say what is it? And then to the right, you have facts, and then you have opinions. So when you and I look at this, the difference between facts and opinions, when we look at the first part, right, the meaning, right, facts refers to something that can be verified or proved to be true. Opinions refer to a judgment or a belief about something. And so what ends up happening along the way is that you and I will begin to now take our opinions, right? And our opinions can be highly influenced, right, by our feelings, right, by our perspective, by our desires, by our attitude, right, experiences, values. And so all of this now becomes injected into this opinion. And so I can really feel quite violated when you go against my opinion, because now I feel like, listen, you don't agree with me. Not that you don't agree with my opinion, you don't agree with me. And so now I may feel like you violated my feelings. I may feel like you violated my values. And it becomes very convoluted. It can become very convoluted. And so now my personal view, my judgment is now something that becomes part of the problem, because I can't just put it out there and just say, hey, here's my opinion, what's your opinion? Let's come to a compromise. But when my opinion has become fact, it's almost like a no-win situation. Because now if your opinion becomes fact and my opinion becomes fact, then who's really going to win? Okay, it's probably going to come down to now power play. And so now it becomes power and control issues. Who's going to have the final say so? Who's going to now, have the final determination about how this goes? And it turns into you against me, me against you. And it doesn't really work for the relationship. And so you and I have to really be careful when we're talking about the difference between facts and opinions, because I would tell you that this is sometimes one of those triggers that can really lead into conflict in a relationship, because we have made our opinion facts instead of the facts being the facts, instead of our opinion becoming facts. Look at this now. Notice now, when we're talking about facts versus opinions, notice now, when we look here, when it says, notice here, it is based upon observation or research, based upon facts. The opinions, right, is based upon the assumption or personal view. Now, remember now I just read that, and that was here on the second category of talking about comparing facts versus opinions. And now remember, I said that when you begin to assume, when you begin to mind read, you have put yourself in a position that is not going to really work towards a resolution. And so this is why I'm saying to you that you and I have to be careful. Now listen, the reality is that all of us will fall into this trap. And when we get enough of our emotions involved and those emotions get fueled to a certain level, we will then believe that our feelings are facts. Our beliefs are facts. Our judgments are facts. And nobody can tell us otherwise. And I would tell you that that kind of misinterpretation of opinion versus facts can really do harm to a relationship. Because now, how can I win? How can we resolve? How can we come to a win-win? Because it's based upon how you're feeling about it. And that may change tomorrow, that may change next week. And so we don't really have a solution that is a long-term solution. It may be that this is the solution for today, but then come tomorrow, you may say, well, hey, we got to now do it this way. And it just creates more and more confusion instead of really creating more peace and tranquility. And this is why I'm telling you that when you're talking about managing conflict, you're talking about a guideline to how we move to a resolution. This is when you and I have to be able to say, what I'm thinking, is it a fact or is it opinion? Because if it's a fact, we can do the work to find out who's right, who's wrong, or more likely, what's right, what's wrong, so that then the facts can be the solution. But if we're talking about something that is based upon feelings, is based upon your judgment, is based upon your attitude, then we may be working at this from now to death, because it's never, ever going to be consistent, because our feelings will change from day to day, from time to time, from moment to moment, from scenario to scenario. And so this is why when you and I are managing conflict, we've got to know the difference between facts versus opinions. Now, I'm looking to see whether or not there are any questions that we have here on YouTube or on Facebook. I don't see any questions here at this time. And so listen, I want to thank you so much for you being here today, allowing us to have the opportunity to be able to really, once again, give some guidelines to how you and I can manage the conflict, because you and I understand that it is just that, managing it so that you and I can get to a place of where we move to a resolution. And listen, and we don't get there by happenstance. We don't get there by accident. We get there because we do the work that is necessary towards working towards a resolution. And so I'm just not going to feel better simply because we've had a conversation. No, I'm going to feel better because we've had a conversation and now we have a plan. Now we're implementing some particulars so that there is peace, fortified peace, long-term peace, so that we do not have to keep revisiting the same thing, because the solution keeps changing. If the goalpost keeps changing, if the rules keep changing, if the field goal keeps changing, then listen, it's going to feel more like it's dramatic and a bunch of drama than it feels like something that I want to be in continuously. And remember, we're talking about how to make our relationships better so that the relationships that we say are most meaningful to us, those are relationships that we continue to feed and fuel so that we might have the kind of relationships that we want to keep returning to day after day. Well, listen, I hope that this has been one of those things that have helped move the needle just a little bit more in your relationship. And so here's one of the things that we always ask that you would do, is that, listen, there's been this investment in you. We would hope that you would return and put an investment with us. And so we ask that you would partner with us. And you say, what does that partnership look like? It is being able to financially assist us in what it is that we do. And so there are different ways in which you can do just that, as you see there on the screen. You would see that there is the Cash App. You can see that that is an option. You can see that PayPal is also an option. It's another way to partner with us. You can, if you prefer to write a check or send a money order, you can see right there that that information is available right there. LifeEmpowermentCh, P.O. Box 7958, Moreno Valley, California 92552. And so we just thank you for your partnership, whether it is a check, whether it is a digital giving that you do through PayPal or one that you do through the Cash App. We just thank you for your partnership with us here at Life Empowerment Church, because this is brought to you by Life Empowerment Church. And so listen, we just want to thank you again for you being here, because it is our goal to really pour into you nuggets, to principles, concepts that really are the gems to help make relationships work. And so listen, we know that we just do not know these things innately. We know these things because somebody takes time out to teach us, or we learn through the school of hard knocks. And I always say, listen, I would rather learn and try and fail and re-engage than to have a long pathway behind me of collateral damage because I kept doing harm until I learned how to do right. And so listen, we're here to help maximize you for your relationships. And so we thank you for being here with us again. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. I have 3 more nuggets that I want to share with you about guidelines to resolving or managing conflict. And then we're going to talk about how do we actually resolve it. Yes, right. There is a plan and a process of how you all actually walk through resolving conflict. And so I look forward to you being here so that you can learn all of those things. And listen, we thank you and we look forward to seeing you again on next Thursday.